I believe in cases like these where the main goal is reunification of a parent and a child, that the best place to start is addressing the basic needs of both the parent and the child, questioning if those are being met, and if they're not being met, how can we sort of work through the process to see that they will be met. I take this perspective from the theory of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that in order for your more complex, sort of emotional, spiritual, social needs to be met, then you have to have the more basic needs being met, meaning adequate food, shelter, clothing, employment, access to medical care when it's necessary. I believe that without those needs being met, it's harder to move forward and have additional needs being met as well. So taking this perspective, as I was doing my treatment recommendations, the first recommendation that I came up with was Loretta finds employment. So I thought that this was the best place to start, because if Loretta is really serious about sort of changing the path of her life and getting her daughter Janet back in her life, then the first really huge step for her is going to be finding a stable job, a way to support herself, a way to support her daughter, and get those basic needs met that we had talked about before. So the best way I thought to support her in that would be to get her connected with a job coach, who she would be meeting with once a week. And that job coach would be there to kind of guide her through the process of what is it like to apply to a job, what is it like, what are the skills that you need in order to keep that job, stuff about negotiating salary, things like that, kind of working off of the skills that Loretta already has and that she's already going to hopefully be able to put forward into a job. It said that Loretta, I saw in her file that she has not worked in a number of years since she became a mother. She was always a stay-at-home mom, and her husband went out and worked. So a lot of things technologically wise have changed, and so it's good that she's going to have that support and somebody to sort of validate and affirm her throughout that entire process. The next treatment recommendation that I made was Loretta lessens her dependence on alcohol. So when Loretta's husband tragically passed away at such a young age, she wasn't necessarily equipped to handle that, whether that be sort of personally and on an individual basis, or with the resources and support she had available to her. She had just her mother, that was family that was close by, and the rest of her family was a bit far away. She had two very young children at the time. It really was. It's always a difficult situation, but she didn't necessarily have the resources and supports in place for her to be successful in that. So she really began to, she started to drink, heavily drink. It started off just as a night activity, and then it turned into a way that she would really get through her days. So if she's not able to sort of work through that, then it's going to be really difficult for her to both sort of make the life change she's looking for, and to have that being reunited with her daughter and having her back in her custody. The two ways that I was planning that we had discussed about how she could be successful in that would be one, to attend an AA meeting each week, give her a supportive community that she could have that could relate to her, and also an AA sponsor to have that community individual support as well, and then also having people that kind of understood what she had gone through, and also holding the AA sponsor would be able to hold her accountable for what was going on, what kind of choices she was making, things like that. So those are sort of the first areas that I would choose to tackle, because without those being met, we can't move forward and have other needs being met as well. Sort of the next big thing that Loretta and I discussed that we think is prudent to focus on would be figuring out sort of those emotional and psychological needs, both for Loretta and for her daughter Janet. They had both been through a great amount of trauma and distress, and from my perspective, just from speaking with the two of them, the amount that I have thus far is that neither of them really dealt with and processed the real grief that was associated with both their husband and father passing away, and them losing them at such a young age, and sort of how that changes the way that they lived their lives and how they functioned, and kind of who they were without that big person present in their life. So I think both individual therapy would be beneficial for each of them because they would have the opportunity to process that grief in their own way without being pressured or pushed by any outside forces. I also think it would be beneficial for them to have therapy counseling sessions together because they've been apart for a long time, and especially with some of the past history, we don't really know the way that Janet feels about her mother right now, and she needs to have an opportunity to express those thoughts and feelings that she has and work through those both on an individual basis and with Loretta as well. Also, something that's important because they've been apart for such a long time was the idea of roles and rules, kind of establishing those, that parent child relationship again that really went through, it really became severed by a lot of the things that went on. So, really working towards that would be a big step for both Loretta and Janet, and I think would move them a lot closer to that reunification, which is exactly what Loretta is looking for and what she's desiring from her relationship with her daughter at this point. Upon making the assessment that I did, when I was looking at Loretta in particular, I saw that with the loss of her husband, loss of motivation, loss of kind of who she was, I thought that major depressive disorder would be an appropriate diagnosis for her. She at first it was she was just sad and upset, and it was hard to get up and do things, and then it turned into that she couldn't really interact with others very well. She couldn't she was having memory issues. She was really just struggling in her day-to-day functioning, and as I looked at her assessment, I found it to be rather interesting that when I looked at all on the Wowed Us assessment, that the areas that she really struggled in had to do with interacting with others. So, areas such as self care and understanding and recognition weren't as impaired because they really just had to do with her predominantly. But the areas that kind of had to do with interacting with others in the outside world, that was really a challenge for her. And the one area that really was more just on an individual basis was had to do a lot with sort of the household chores, getting them done, understanding how to do them, prioritizing, and she scored very high in that. So that was an area that was really a challenge for her. And upon looking at that assessment, I saw that as she really, when her husband died, she didn't know how to be a mother. She didn't know how to be herself as an individual, as an adult outside in the world, interacting with other adults. When she lost her husband, she really didn't know how to be those other roles. And that's something that I think will really be worked through in those individual therapy sessions. Just kind of getting her back to where she wants to be emotionally and psychologically and that sort of thing. So I believe that we have set forth a plan. Loretta and I have discussed sort of what her goals are and where she wants to go. And I am confident and hopeful that we'll be able to reach those goals for her and that it'll be the healthiest thing for both her and her daughter.